The rawhide bit into Mara's wrists as Taharos yanked her forward, his Apache warriors circling like wolves around prey. "You are nothing now," he spat, his eyes burning with a grief that promised slow death. "Property, a thing to be broken." But through the smoke and terror she glimpsed a shadow moving against the moonlight, a lone Lakota scout who had defied every law of survival to come for her. In that moment, as blood dripped from her torn dress and hope seemed as distant as the stars, Mara Voss made a choice that would ignite a war between tribes and expose the true demons wearing civilized suits in town halls. Dear listeners, I invite you to follow this harrowing tale of survival, forbidden love, and the courage to name your own destiny. Comment below which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The attack came 3 hours before dawn, when the February cold had settled deep into the bones of the frontier settlement. Mara Voss woke to the sound of splintering wood, and her mother's scream cut short. Through the thin walls of their cabin, orange light danced, not the warm glow of their hearth, but the violent blaze of the barn burning. "Get to the root cellar," her father shouted, fumbling for his rifle in the dark. The weapon never made it to his shoulder. An arrow whistled through the shattered window and found its mark between his ribs. He dropped to his knees, eyes wide with shock, blood bubbling from his lips as he tried to speak her name. Mara scrambled backward, her nightgown catching on the rough floorboards. The door exploded inward. Warriors poured through Apache, their faces painted for war, eyes reflecting the flames outside. She recognized the patterns from the trading post warnings, the ones that meant vengeance raid. A hand tangled in her hair, yanking her upright. She struck out blindly, her fist connecting with a painted cheek, earning a grunt of surprise. Another warrior laughed, a sound devoid of humor, and backhanded her across the face. Stars exploded across her vision. "This one fights," someone said in accented English. "Good, Taharos will want spirit to break." They dragged her from the cabin, past her father's still form, past the garden she'd tended since spring. The corn stalks she'd watered through the drought now crackled in flames. Her bare feet scraped across frozen ground, leaving bloody prints in the frost. When she stumbled, they hauled her upright. When she screamed, they stuffed a leather gag between her teeth. The ride lasted until noon, her hands bound to the saddle horn, her body bouncing painfully against the horse's spine with each stride. The warriors spoke in Apache around her, their words sharp as winter wind. She caught fragments, something about balance, about loss, about making the white settlements understand pain. The camp materialized from the landscape like it had grown from the earth itself. Hide tents arranged in careful circles, smoke rising from multiple fires. Women and children emerged to watch their arrival, their faces unreadable. An elder woman spat at Mara's feet as they passed. They threw her to the ground before the largest tent. She landed hard, gravel biting into her palms. A shadow fell across her, and she looked up into eyes that held death. Taharos stood over her, his war paint streaked with dirt and what might have been blood. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30 winters, but his face carried the weight of ancient grief. Fresh scarification marked his chest where his shirt hung open, the wounds still angry and red. "You know why you're here." His English was precise, learned from years of forced treaties and broken promises. Mara worked the gag from her mouth with her tongue. "I've done nothing to you. Your people took my sister." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, more terrifying than any shout. "Soldiers came to our winter camp, said we harbored hostiles. She ran toward me 7 winters old, and they shot her for sport, laughed as she bled into the snow." The camp had gone silent, everyone watching. "I didn't," Mara began, but he cut her off with a gesture. "You are white. That is enough. You will learn what it means to be property, to have no name, no voice, no tomorrow that belongs to you." He turned to his warriors. "Chain her to the post. She hauls water at dawn, grinds corn until her hands bleed. Anyone who shows mercy answers to me." The post stood at the camp's edge, a rough pine trunk worn smooth by previous captives. They locked an iron shackle around her ankle, military surplus, she noted with bitter irony, probably sold by the same merchants who supplied the army that killed Taharos's sister. Night fell like a burial shroud. Mara huddled against the post, her nightgown offering no protection against the cold. Around the camp, normal life continued. Children played, women cooked, men tended weapons. She might have been invisible except for the occasional glance, the random child who wandered close before being called sharply away. Her second day began with a kick to her ribs. A warrior she'd learned to call Snake Eye for his lazy left eye handed her 2 buffalo stomach bags. Water from the creek. Spill any you go without drinking today. The creek lay a quarter-mile from camp down a treacherous slope of loose shale. Her bare feet, already raw, left blood trails on the rocks. The water was so cold it burned, but she forced herself to fill the bags completely. The trip back took 3 times as long, her legs shaking under the weight. She made 7 trips that day. By the 5th, her vision swam. By the 7th, she moved on will, alone. That night, they gave her a handful of dried meat and a gourd of water, just enough to keep her useful. The 3rd day brought corn grinding. The Apache women worked beside her in silence, their stone pestles rising and falling in rhythm. Mara's hands, soft from a life of different labor, blistered within an hour. The blisters burst, blood mixed with cornmeal. Still she ground because stopping meant no food, and no food meant death. But Mara watched. She always had been a watcher, even back home. She noticed how the women's eyes would flick toward certain tents when they gossiped. She mapped the guard rotations, memorized which warriors favored their left side in walks, old injuries perhaps. She studied Taharos most of all, how his grief had carved channels in his authority, leaving weak points where rage overruled wisdom. On the 4th night she heard them arguing, Taharos and an older warrior, their voices carrying from the chief's tent. "This accomplishes nothing," the elder said. "The girl's death won't bring back your sister. I don't plan to kill her. Death is too quick. Let her live as nothing as they condemned us to live. Let her people wonder and worry. Let them taste the helplessness. You invite retaliation on all Apache. They retaliate regardless. At least now they have a reason." The conversation ended with someone storming out. Through the tent walls, a lamp flickered, and Mara saw Taharos's silhouette, hunched head, in hands, shoulders shaking with what might have been tears. On the 5th day, everything changed. She was hauling her 3rd load of water when she saw him, a figure on the ridgeline where no figure should be. The guards hadn't noticed, focused on a dice game near the main fire. The figure moved with deliberate slowness, using the shadows of clouds across the moon. Then he was gone like smoke dispersed by wind. That night, as she lay against her post, fighting sleep, she heard it, barely a whisper coming from the darkness beyond the camp's edge. "Don't scream." Her heart hammered against her ribs. A shape materialized from the black, a man moving low, painted for night work. Not Apache. The patterns were different. Lakota, if her trading post education served. "I'm going to cut your chain." He breathed so quiet she almost thought she'd imagined it. But not tonight. Too many guards awake. Tomorrow, same time, be ready. "Who are you?" "Someone who believes suffering shouldn't birth more suffering. My name is Rook. They'll kill you if they find you here." "They'll try." A flash of teeth in the darkness, a grin or grimace, she couldn't tell. "I've been watching 3 days. Tomorrow during the night, change of guard. There's a deer trail north, leads to a box canyon. Can you run? I'll crawl if I have to." "Good. Survive until tomorrow." He melted back into darkness, leaving Mara to wonder if exhaustion had finally driven her to hallucinations. But the next morning she found something tucked beneath the post, a small bundle of jerked meat wrapped in sage leaves. Real. He was real. That day dragged like a wounded animal. Every time a warrior looked her way, she feared they could read her thoughts. When Taharos passed studying her with those grief-deadened eyes, she forced herself to appear broken, defeated. It wasn't hard, she was both those things. But now she was something else too, a woman with a chance. Snake Eye kicked her awake for water duty. "Move faster today. Big war council tonight, many throats to wet." A war council. The camp would be distracted, focused inward. Perhaps Rook knew this had planned for it. She hauled water with renewed purpose, counting guards, noting which ones drank heavily at dinner, which grew careless as darkness fell. As sunset painted the camp orange and red, warriors gathered in the central circle. Taharos stood before them, voice rising and falling in Apache cadences. She caught words here and there: white settlements, revenge, a town called Millbrook that had refused to trade with Apache bands. The warriors' responses grew heated. Some shouted approval, others seemed to argue for caution. In the chaos of debate, nobody noticed her anymore. She had become what Taharos wanted, a thing furniture barely worth guarding. The moon rose behind clouds, casting everything in silver and shadow. The council continued, voices now rough from drink and argument. Guards had been pulled closer to protect the gathering, leaving the camp's edges darker, less watched. She heard him before she saw him, a soft whistle like a night bird, but slightly off. Her hands trembled as she responded with the pattern he'd taught her the night before. Movement in the darkness. Then Rook was there, solid and real, a knife in his hand that caught no light. "The chain," she whispered. He shook his head. "Changed plan. Too much noise. We go with it on, break it later." He produced a leather cord, wrapped it around the chain links to muffle them. "Can you stand?" Her legs felt like water, but she nodded. He pulled her upright, his hands steady and sure. This close, she could see his face, angular features, a scar across his left eyebrow, eyes that held a kindness she'd forgotten existed. "Stay low, step where I step. No matter what you hear, don't look back." They moved through the camp like ghosts, using tent shadows and smoke from dying fires as cover. Every few steps, Rook would freeze, listening. Mara's heart thundered so loud she was certain the entire camp could hear it. The chain, despite the leather wrapping, clinked softly with each step. They had nearly reached the camp's edge when a child emerged from a tent, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked directly at them. Mara's blood turned to ice. The boy opened his mouth. Rook moved faster than thought. Not to attack, but dropping to one knee, placing a finger to his lips. From his pouch he produced something, a carved wooden horse, the kind traders sold at posts. He rolled it gently toward the boy, who caught it instinctively. The child looked at the toy, then at Rook, then simply turned and walked back into his tent. They reached the deer trail as shouts erupted behind them. Someone had finally checked the post, found her gone. Horns wailed, dogs barked, the hunt was on. "Run," Rook commanded, and Mara ran. The trail was barely visible in moonlight, a thread of possibility winding up the canyon wall. Loose rocks scattered under their feet. Behind them, torches flared to life, bobbing like angry fireflies as warriors spread out to search. Her ankle chain caught on a root. She went down hard gravel, tearing into her palms. Rook hauled her up without breaking stride. "Leave me," she gasped. "Then I die here too," he said simply, and somehow that gave her strength to continue. They climbed higher, the trail becoming more treacherous. Below, she could hear Taharos's voice commanding his warriors in Apache. They were organized now, methodical, closing the net. The trail split. Rook chose left without hesitation, pulling her into a narrow crevice between two massive stones. They pressed deep into the darkness, chests heaving, listening to the sounds of pursuit grow closer. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk this for a stranger? Because I once stood by and watched suffering I could have prevented. Never again." Footsteps on the trail. A warrior's shadow passed the crevice entrance. Paused. Mara held her breath, pressing against Rook, feeling his heartbeat against her back. Steady, controlled, while hers raced like a panicked rabbit's. The shadow moved on. They waited 10 heartbeats, 20. Then Rook guided her deeper into the crevice. It opened into a small cave, invisible from outside. Rest, he said. We move again before dawn. They'll find us, maybe, but Taharos is proud. He'll assume you ran for the settlements, not deeper into Indian territory. He produced a water skin, pressed it to her lips. Drink. The water tasted of leather and life. She drank deeply, then noticed Rook examining her ankle where the shackle had worn the skin raw. He pulled herbs from his pouch, mixed them with water into a paste. This will sting, he warned, then applied it to the wounds. It burned like fire, then cooled to blessed numbness. You're not just a scout, she observed. My grandmother was a healer. She taught me before. He trailed off, focused on his work. Before what? Before I chose mercy over vengeance and my tribe cast me out for it. The weight of that statement settled between them. An outcast risking everything to save another outcast. For that's what she was now, neither white nor Apache, belonging nowhere. Dawn light crept into the cave, painting everything gold and dangerous. Rook peered out, scanning the canyon below. They've pulled back to camp, probably planning a proper hunt. We need distance. He produced a small hammer and chisel from his pack, gesturing for her ankle. Hold still. 3 precise strikes and the shackle fell away. Mara almost cried at the relief. They emerged from the cave into a world transformed by morning light. The trail continued up toward a ridge that promised either escape or a fatal fall. Rook led with sure steps, occasionally reaching back to steady her. They had climbed for an hour when the first arrow struck. It whistled past Mara's ear, shattering against the rock face. Then came more, a deadly rain from warriors positioned on the opposite canyon wall. Rook shoved her behind a boulder as shafts clattered around them. They found us faster than expected, he said, oddly calm. Taharos must have brought his best trackers. An arrow grazed his shoulder, tearing fabric and flesh. He grunted but didn't cry out. Blood seeped through his shirt. You're hit? I've had worse. He peered around the boulder, calculating. There, see that overhang? When I say run, you go. Don't stop no matter what. What about you? Instead of answering, he pulled his rifle from his back, a beautiful Winchester she hadn't noticed before. Run, now. She ran. Behind her, the rifle cracked once, twice. A scream from across the canyon. The arrow rain faltered. She reached the overhang, pressed against the wall, turned to see Rook sprinting toward her rifle, smoking. They pushed higher, always higher, the trail becoming a whisper of possibility against sheer stone. Below, she could hear pursuit closer now, inexorable. Her legs shook, her lungs burned. The remains of her nightgown hung in tatters, offering no protection against the sharp rocks and bitter wind. Then the trail ended. They stood at a cliff edge, nothing beyond but a 50-foot drop to sharp rocks. Behind them, warriors emerged from the trail, weapons raised. Taharos himself led them, his face a mask of cold fury. Nowhere to run, Lakota, he said, in English, wanting Mara to understand. You chose to interfere. Now you choose how you die. Rook stepped forward, placing himself between Mara and the warriors. I invoke the old law, single combat. If I win, the woman goes free. Taharos laughed, a sound like breaking bones. You think we follow old laws for thieves. I think you follow them for warriors. Or has grief made you forget what honor looks like? The insult landed like a physical blow. Taharos's hand went to his knife. The other warriors shifted, uncertain. One, the elder Mara, had heard arguing before, stepped forward. The Lakota speaks truth, he said in accented English. The old laws exist for reasons. Accept or be known as one who hides behind numbers. Taharos's jaw clenched. Pride warred with rage across his features. Finally he nodded. Knives. To the death. To first blood, Rook countered keen. Death serves no one here. Death or nothing. Rook looked back at Mara. Something passed between them, not love, not yet, but recognition, understanding, a shared knowledge that some things were worth dying for. Death then, Rook agreed. The warriors formed a circle at the cliff's edge, nowhere to retreat, only forward or down. Taharos shed his shirt, revealing the scars of a lifetime's battles. Rook did the same, and Mara gasped. His torso was a map of violence, survived each scar a story of persistence. They circled each other, knives catching morning light. Taharos struck first, fast as a rattlesnake. Rook twisted aside the blade, whistling past his ribs. His counterstrike forced Taharos back, drawing a thin line of blood across the Apache's forearm. "First blood," someone muttered, but Taharos snarled, "I said death." He pressed forward, a whirlwind of fury and skill. Rook gave ground, defending, waiting. Mara saw his strategy, let Taharos exhaust himself against patient defense like water wearing down stone. But Taharos was no fool. He recognized the tactic, pulled back, began his own patient stalking. They danced at the cliff's edge, death dropping away inches from their feet. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows, turning the fight into something mythic. Then Taharos feinted left and went right, his blade finding Rook's side. Not deep, but enough to bring a grunt of pain. Blood flowed freely now, and Rook's movements slowed. "You weaken, Lakota, ready to join your ancestors." Rook said nothing, saving breath for survival. But Mara saw something in his eyes, not defeat, but calculation. He was leading Taharos somewhere, setting up something. The Apache lunged again, committed fully to what he thought was a killing strike. But Rook had baited him. He dropped beneath the thrust, swept Taharos's legs, and suddenly the Apache was falling backward toward the cliff's edge. Rook caught his wrist. For a moment, Taharos dangled over the void, held only by the man he'd been trying to kill. Their eyes met. Understanding passed between them. Rook could let go, claim victory, and no one would question it. Instead, he hauled Taharos back to solid ground. The Apache lay gasping, staring at the sky. "Why? Because your sister's death shouldn't birth more death. Because someone has to break the cycle." Taharos closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed. "The woman goes free, but you're both banished from Apache lands. If I see either again, no mercy will save you." He stood, turned to his warriors. "We return to camp. Tonight, we mourn properly, without need for white blood to wash our grief." As the Apache filed away, the elder who had spoken for honor paused beside Rook. "You fought well, both of you." He looked at Mara. "Survive, white woman. Prove my nephew wrong about your people." Then they were alone on the cliff. Rook bleeding, Mara shaking the sun, climbing toward noon in a sky that suddenly seemed infinite with possibility. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Can you?" he countered, and despite everything, she laughed, a sound she'd thought she'd never make again. They descended the far side of the ridge, Rook leaning on her now, his blood marking their trail. She didn't know where they were going, didn't know if they'd survive the journey, but she was no longer property, no longer nothing. She was Mara Voss, and she had chosen to live. The trail wound downward toward a distant valley where smoke rose from what might be a Lakota camp, or it might be nothing, a trick of light and hope. Either way, they walked toward it together, two outcasts writing a new story with each painful step. Behind them, something glinted in the rocks where they'd fought, a small object barely visible. If someone had investigated, they would have found papers wrapped in oilcloth, stamped with the seal of the Whitmore and Gaines Trading Company, but no one looked, not yet. The sun reached its zenith as they disappeared into the tree line, leaving only blood and footprints to mark their passing. In the Apache camp, Taharos sat in his tent, turning his knife over and over, contemplating the weight of mercy. And somewhere in the settlements, men in suits counted profits from bullets sold to both sides, never knowing how close they'd come to exposure. But those were revelations for another day. For now, there was only the trail, the pain, and the stubborn determination of two people who refused to become what the world insisted they must be. The trees closed around them like a sanctuary of shadows, but Mara knew better than to trust their shelter. Every snapping twig made her flinch. Every bird call could be a signal. Rook's weight against her shoulder grew heavier with each step, his blood leaving a trail that any competent tracker could follow blindfolded. "We need to stop," she said when they reached a small clearing. "You're losing too much blood." "Can't stop here. Too exposed." But even as he protested, his knees buckled. She barely managed to guide him to a fallen log before he collapsed entirely. The wound on his side wept steadily. She tore strips from what remained of her nightgown, pressing them against the gash. The fabric soaked through immediately. "In my pack," he gasped. "Yellow powder. Pack the wound." She found the pouch, recognized the sulfur mixture from her father's war stories. Her father dead now, less than a week gone, but feeling like a lifetime. She pushed the thought away, focused on keeping Rook alive. The powder hissed as it met blood, and he bit down on a stick to keep from screaming. "Why did you really come for me?" she asked, trying to distract him from the pain. The truth, this time. His eyes found hers, glazed with agony, but still sharp. "3 moons ago, soldiers came to our winter camp, said they were looking for hostiles who'd raided a supply wagon, but I'd tracked those same hostiles. They were white men dressed as Lakota. I tried to tell the soldiers, but they didn't want to hear it. They wanted Indian blood." She wound fresh bandages around his torso, her hands steady despite the horror of his words. "My brother's wife was heavy with child. When the shooting started, she couldn't run fast enough. I had a choice, follow my war chief's orders to fight or help her escape. I chose her, got her to safety, but when I returned, the chief named me coward. Said I'd betrayed our warriors by not standing with them. Exile was merciful. Many wanted me dead. So you saved me to prove you're not a coward." "No." He caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "I saved you because watching innocent people suffer while I do nothing makes me someone I can't live with being. Courage isn't about fighting. It's about choosing right when everyone says you're wrong." A branch cracked in the forest behind them, then another, not random, patterned, deliberate. They were being tracked. "Can you run?" she whispered. "Do I have a choice?" She helped him stand, shouldering his pack alongside him. They moved deeper into the woods, no longer following any trail, just pushing through undergrowth that tore at exposed skin. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Not Apache, she realized. The rhythm was different. These were white men, probably bounty hunters who'd heard about the raid. They stumbled down a steep ravine, Rook using his rifle as a walking stick. At the bottom, a creek ran fast with snowmelt. He pointed upstream. "Water breaks scent trails. Stay in the shallows." The water was so cold it burned, turning her feet numb within seconds. But they pushed on, slipping on algae, slick rocks, fighting the current. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, Rook guided her to the opposite bank where a massive pine had fallen, creating a hollow beneath its trunk. They crawled inside just as voices became audible above the ravine. "Trail goes cold at the water," someone said. "Could have gone either way. Spread out, check both banks. That Apache war chief is offering 50 horses for the woman's return. The Lakota who took her is worth another 20 dead or alive." Mara felt Rook tense beside her. 50 horses was a fortune enough to buy loyalty from almost anyone. Taharos must have changed his mind about letting them go, or perhaps this was his way of honoring his agreement while still ensuring they didn't survive. The hunters moved along the banks, their boots heavy on the wet stones. One passed within arm's reach of their hiding spot. Mara could see his boots through a gap in the roots, expensive leather military surplus. He paused, and she was certain he'd heard, her heart hammering. Then a shout from upstream. "Found blood on a rock." They went north. The boots moved away, running now. Rook's blood on some distant stone had saved them, but it wouldn't fool the hunters for long. They waited until full dark before emerging. Rook's fever had started during their hiding. She could feel heat radiating from him even in the cold night air. His words came slurred when he tried to speak. "Need medicine woman. Lakota camp. Maybe 2 days north." "You won't make 2 days." She studied their surroundings, trying to remember her father's lessons about frontier survival. We need shelter, proper shelter. She found it an hour later, a trapper's cabin, long abandoned, half collapsed, but with 3 walls and most of a roof still standing. Inside, ancient furs rotted in a corner, and a rusted pot sat by a stone fireplace that might still draw. No fire, Rook mumbled as she laid him on the moldy furs. Smoke, they'll see. You'll die without warmth. She'd made her decision. I'll make it smokeless. My grandfather taught me. She gathered the driest wood she could find, built a small fire using the Cherokee method her grandfather had shown her before politics made him pretend he'd never known such things. The smoke dispersed through the broken roof, invisible against the night sky. Rook's fever climbed. He thrashed, speaking in Lakota, reliving some battle she couldn't understand. She bathed his face with creek water, forced him to drink when he was lucid enough. The wound had gone angry red at the edges, infection setting in despite the sulfur. Near midnight, he grabbed her hand with surprising strength. If I die, you're not dying. Listen, if I die, go north. Find the Lakota camp. Tell them Rook Greyhawk died with honor. They'll give you sanctuary. Stop talking about dying and fight, damn you. He smiled weakly. You sound like my grandmother. She was stubborn too. Refused to die until she'd seen me become a man. Lived through 3 bullets and a winter that killed half our band. Said death had to wait its turn. Then be like her. Make death wait. She kept the fire going through the night, feeding it 1 stick at a time. When Rook's fever spiked dangerously, she made a decision that would have horrified her proper settler self a week ago. She stripped off her tattered nightgown and lay against him, skin to skin, sharing her body heat. He was burning and freezing at once, shaking so hard she had to hold him down to keep him from reopening his wound. Sometime before dawn, the fever broke. His breathing steadied. When gray light filtered through the broken roof, his eyes opened clear for the first time in hours. You stayed, he said, wonder in his voice. Where would I go? She tried for lightness, failed. You're my only chance of survival out here. Liar. His hand found her face thumb, tracing her cheekbone. You could have taken my rifle, my supplies. Headed for the nearest settlement. Claimed Indians killed your family and you escaped. And become the woman everyone pities. The survivor who jumps at shadows, who sees Apache in every dark corner. She shook her head. That's not surviving. That's just slower dying. He studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. You're stronger than you know. I'm learning to be. They stayed in the cabin through that day, Rook recovering strength while Mara ventured out for water and edible plants. She found early spring shoots, bitter but nourishing, and even managed to snare a rabbit using tricks her father had taught her but never thought she'd need. As they ate the stringy meat that evening, Rook pointed to marks on the cabin wall. She hadn't noticed tally marks, hundreds of them grouped in sets of 7. Trapper counted days, he said. See where they stop, middle of winter looks like. Probably starved or froze. Cheerful thought. Reality. This frontier doesn't forgive weakness or mistakes. He paused, studying her. But you're neither weak nor mistaken. You're choosing to live on your own terms. That's rare. Is that what you did when you chose exile over fighting? I chose conscience over tradition. Cost me everything, my family, my place, my people. Been wandering 2 seasons now, taking scout work from settlements that don't ask questions, avoiding Lakota territory. He stared into the dying fire. Saving you was the first thing that's felt right since my exile. What will your people say if you bring a white woman to their camp? Some will say I've proven my betrayal. Others might see it differently. My grandmother always said the spirits test us with choices that have no good answer, only different kinds of right. That night she woke to find him sitting up, rifle across his knees, staring at the door. What is it? Horses. Maybe an hour ago. They passed but didn't stop. Could be hunters, could be travelers. Either way, we move at first light. She packed their meager supplies while he tested his strength, wincing but mobile. The wound had started to heal clean, though it would leave another scar for his collection. They left the cabin as dawn painted the sky pink and gold, heading north by northeast, following game trails when they could find them. Rook moved slower than before, but steady, teaching her, as they walked, how to read wind patterns, which plants would heal and which would kill, how to move without startling birds, whose alarm calls could give away their position. By noon, they reached a ridge that offered a view of the valley behind them. Smoke rose from several points too organized to be campfires. Search parties, Rook confirmed. They're sweeping the valley in grids. Military precision. This isn't just about Apache honor anymore. What do you mean? He pulled her down behind a boulder as he studied the patterns. Those aren't Apache tactics. That's army training. Someone's organizing this hunt, someone who wants us badly enough to coordinate multiple groups. She remembered the men in the Apache camp, the ones who hadn't quite fit, whose gear had been too new, too uniform. There were strangers in Taharos's camp. I thought they were traders, but traders don't usually help plan raids. Rook's expression darkened. There's something bigger happening here. Someone's using Apache grief as a weapon. They descended the far side of the ridge as afternoon clouds gathered promising snow. The temperature dropped steadily, and Mara's thin dress offered no protection. Rook gave her his jacket, ignoring her protests. You need it more than... She started. I've survived worse cold. You haven't. Don't argue. They found shelter in a cave as the first snowflakes began to fall. Not ideal, only one entrance meant no escape route, but better than freezing in the open. Rook built a small fire far back in the cave where the light wouldn't show. Tell me about your family, he said, as they waited for the storm to pass. Before all this, she found herself talking for the first time since the raid, about her mother's garden, her father's stubborn pride in their little homestead, her younger brother who'd died of fever 2 winters ago. The words hurt, but they also healed something, making her family real again instead of just bloody memories. My mother sang while she worked, she said. Hymns mostly, but sometimes old songs from her grandmother, songs in words she didn't understand but remembered anyway. What kind of words? Mara sang a few bars, the melody haunting in the cave's echo. Rook sat up straighter. That's Cherokee. Your grandmother's songs, they're Cherokee. That's impossible. My grandmother was from Virginia, proper English stock. The words say, we remember the old path we walked toward morning. That's a removal song from the Trail of Tears. She stared at him, mind reeling. My mother never said, she never, many didn't. Easier to be white if you could pass. Safer. His voice held no judgment, only understanding. But blood remembers what minds forget. The revelation shook something loose in her chest. She wasn't just a white woman fleeing Apache justice. She was something more complex, carrying songs of displacement in her very bones. The snow fell harder, sealing them in their cave. They sat close for warmth, and Mara found herself studying Rook's profile in the firelight. The scar across his eyebrow had a story, she was sure. The way his hands moved when he tended the fire spoke of years of practice. He was a map of survival, and she wanted to read every line. What, he asked, catching her stare. You're not what I expected. When I first heard Lakota warrior, I thought what I'd been taught to think. And now I think those teachings were just another kind of chain. He turned to face her fully. Dangerous thinking for a white woman. I'm not sure that's what I am anymore, not fully. I'm something in between, like you. The space between them hummed with possibility. She leaned forward, drawn by something stronger than reason. Their lips had almost touched when a sound outside made them freeze, footsteps in snow, deliberate and careful. Rook doused the fire with a handful of dirt, plunging them into darkness. They pressed against the cave wall, barely breathing. A figure appeared at the entrance, backlit by snow glare, then another and another. Tracks lead here, a voice said. Not Apache, not military either, something else. Check inside, boss wants them alive if possible, but dead works too. A torch flared to life, throwing wild shadows on the cave walls. The men entered slowly, weapons drawn. Mara could feel Rook coiling beside her, ready to strike, but they were outnumbered 3-1 at least. The torch swung their way. In a moment, it would reveal them. Rook's hand found hers in the darkness, a silent goodbye. Then, from outside came a sound that made everyone freeze, a war cry, high and fierce, followed by the twang of bowstrings. The men at the cave entrance spun around. One fell immediately, an arrow in his throat. Another cursed, firing wildly into the snow. "Apache, it's a damn war party." The hunters scattered, their organized search dissolving into chaos. The torchbearer dropped his light and ran. In the confusion, Rook pulled Mara deeper into the cave, finding a narrow passage she hadn't noticed before. They crawled through absolute darkness, stone scraping skin, following air currents that promised another exit. Behind them, the sounds of battle continued, screams, gunfire, the terrible efficiency of surprise attack. They emerged on the far side of the hill, snow stinging their faces. Below them, they could see the fight, not Apache, Mara realized, but Lakota warriors. And they weren't attacking randomly. They were herding the hunters away, driving them south. "That's Running Elk," Rook breathed. "My cousin, but how did he know?" One of the warriors looked up, saw them, raised a hand in acknowledgement before disappearing into the storm. A clear message, the path north was clear for now. They ran through the blizzard, trusting directions more than sight. The cold was brutal, stealing feeling from extremities, making each step an act of will. Mara's world narrowed to Rook's back, following him through a white void that could have been death itself. When she fell, she didn't even feel the impact. One moment she was moving, the next, she was face down in snow, unable to make her legs work. Rook's arms around her, lifting his voice urgent in her ear, but the words lost to wind and exhaustion. She drifted, suspended between consciousness and void. Her grandmother's Cherokee songs mixed with her mother's hymns. Her father called her name. Her dead brother laughed. Taharo stood over her, but his face kept shifting, becoming someone else. Someone in a suit, counting money, counting bodies, counting profit. Warmth, sudden and encompassing. She forced her eyes open to find herself in a tent wrapped in buffalo robes. A fire crackled in the center and an old woman sat beside it, grinding something in a stone bowl. The woman looked up, eyes sharp as winter stars. "So," she said in accented English, "you're the white woman my grandson nearly died to save." Mara tried to speak, managed only a croak. The woman, Rook's grandmother, it had to be, brought her water, helped her drink. Where is he?" "Arguing with the council. They're deciding whether to grant you sanctuary or cast you both out. He's threatening to challenge anyone who votes for exile. Foolish boy, always leading with his heart instead of his head. They came for us, your warriors." "Why?" The old woman smiled. "Running Elk never agreed with my grandson's exile. When he heard Rook had saved a captive from the Apache, he convinced a few young warriors to shadow you, protection from a distance. They couldn't openly defy the chief's exile order, but they could make sure the hunters didn't catch you. Now everything changes. The hunters spoke before they died, mentioned payments plans, something bigger than just recovering an escaped captive." She leaned forward, eyes intense. "Tell me, girl, what did you see in the Apache camp? What did you notice that others might have missed?" Mara thought back, forcing her exhausted mind to focus. There were men who didn't belong. Their gear was too new, too uniform. They had papers. I saw Taharos reading them, though I couldn't make out what they said. And once late at night I heard them talking about railroad routes and clearing territories. The old woman's expression darkened. "As we suspected, someone's playing a long game, using tribal conflicts to clear land for their purposes." She stood, moved toward the tent flap. "Rest now. My grandson will need you strong for what comes next." What comes next? But the old woman was already gone, leaving Mara alone with her questions and the growing certainty that her capture had never been random. that she'd been a pawn in something much larger than Apache vengeance or personal survival. Outside, she could hear voices raised in debate, Lakota words she didn't understand, but tones that translated perfectly. Fear, anger, defiance, hope. Rook's voice rose above them all, passionate and unwavering, fighting for her, fighting for them both, fighting for the right to choose their own path in a world that seemed determined to choose for them. She closed her eyes, felt tears slip free, not from sadness or fear, but from something else, a fierce gratitude for this man who'd chosen conscience over comfort, who'd risked everything for a stranger, who even now stood against his own people for the principle of sanctuary. The tent flap opened. Rook entered, moving stiffly, exhaustion written in every line of his body. But his eyes held triumph. "You're safe," he said simply. "The council voted. You stay." She reached for him, and he came to her, collapsing beside her in the robes. They held each other, two broken people in a broken world, finding wholeness in their shared brokenness. "What now?" she whispered. "Now we heal, we prepare, and we find out who's really behind all this." Together. His arms tightened around her. Together. Outside, the storm was passing. Soon there would be difficult questions to answer, truths to uncover, battles to fight. But for now, in this moment, they had sanctuary. They had each other. And somewhere in the settlements, men in expensive suits reviewed maps and counted days, unaware that their carefully laid plans had just developed a complication. Two people who refused to play their assigned roles, who'd chosen love over law, truth over tradition. The game was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. The morning sun cast long shadows through the village as Mara emerged from the tent, her body still weak but her spirit strengthening with each breath of crisp air. The Lakota camp spread before her in organized circles, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing between the lodges, despite the tension that hung over everything like morning mist. Every face that turned her way held questions, suspicions, some openly hostile. Rook stood near the central fire, speaking with three elders, whose weathered faces gave nothing away. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression, a softening that made the nearest elder frown and mutter something in Lakota that sounded like disapproval. "She shouldn't be walking yet." Rook's grandmother appeared at Mara's elbow, steady hands guiding her to a log near the fire. But white women are stubborn, like mules, but less useful. Despite the harsh words, the old woman's hands were gentle as she checked Mara's pulse, examined her eyes for signs of remaining fever. "You'll live. Whether that's good fortune or bad remains to be seen." A group of women had gathered near the next fire circle, their voices carrying clearly. They spoke in Lakota, but their gestures toward Mara needed no translation. One woman, younger than the rest, with intricate beadwork adorning her dress, broke from the group and approached. "You bring death," she said in clear English, her dark eyes fierce. "My husband says the Apache will come for you, that we'll pay for Rook's foolishness with our blood." Before Mara could respond, Rook intervened. "Mourning Dove, the Apache won't violate our territory for one escaped captive. Taharos gave his word." Mourning Dove laughed bitterly. "The word of a grieving war chief. That's what you'd have us stake our children's lives on." She turned back to Mara. "Every moment you remain here endangers us all. If you had any honor, you'd leave." Where would she go? Rook's voice hardened. "Back to settlements that would use her story to justify more violence against all tribes. Or perhaps you'd prefer she return to Taharos, let him complete his vengeance." "I'd prefer she'd never come here at all." The confrontation drew others. Warriors drifted closer, hands casual but near weapons. Mara felt the pressure building, violence crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. She stood through, her legs trembled. "You're right," she said to Mourning Dove, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "I do bring danger, but not the kind you think." She reached into the hidden pocket of the dress Rook's grandmother had given her, pulled out a folded paper she'd managed to keep through everything. "This was in the Apache camp. I took it when they weren't watching." Rook took the paper, unfolded it carefully. His expression darkened as he read. It's a shipping manifest. Rifles, ammunition, whiskey, all marked for delivery to hostile tribes through the Whitmore and Gaines Trading Company. One of the elders, a man with silver-braided hair and milky blind eyes, spoke for the first time. Read it all, nephew. Rook continued, his voice growing harder with each line. Payment authorized by Territorial Governor's Special Fund for Indian Conflict Resolution, dated 3 weeks before the Apache raid on Mara's settlement. The implications settled over the gathering like a shroud. Someone had armed the Apache, encouraged the raid, wanted the escalation. Mourning Dove's hostility wavered, replaced by confusion. But why would white men arm Apache to attack other whites? The blind elder laughed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. Child, you think this is about white or Apache. This is about land, always land. Create conflict, demand military intervention, clear the territories for settlement and rail lines. We've seen this dance before. A young warrior burst into the circle, breathing hard from running. Riders approaching from the south, many riders. They carry a white flag, but they're armed for war. The camp erupted into motion. Warriors grabbed weapons, women hurried children into tents, and Rook pulled Mara behind him as they moved toward the camp's edge. Through the morning haze, she could see them, 20 riders, maybe more, moving in formation toward the village. As they drew closer, Mara's heart sank. Leading them was Taharos himself, his face painted for diplomacy rather than war, but his presence here meant her sanctuary was already in jeopardy. Beside him rode a white man in an expensive suit, incongruous among the Apache warriors. The Lakota chief, a younger man than Mara had expected, with intelligent eyes and careful movements, stepped forward. Taharos of the Apache, you enter Lakota territory under peace banner. State your purpose. Taharos dismounted, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. Chief Standing Bear, I come not for war but for justice. The woman belongs to me by right of capture. The Lakota who stole her violated the oldest laws between our peoples. The old laws also speak of sanctuary, Standing Bear replied. She has claimed it and we have granted it. The white man dismounted, brushing dust from his suit with fastidious care. Gentlemen, perhaps we can resolve this without invoking ancient customs. His smile was oil on water. I'm James Whitmore, representing the territorial government's interests in maintaining peace. Mara felt Rook tense beside her. This was one of the names from the manifest, one of the men profiting from the violence. Whitmore continued, seemingly unaware of the recognition. The government is prepared to offer compensation to both tribes for a peaceful resolution. 50 head of cattle to the Apache for their loss, and new hunting rights for the Lakota in the western valleys. Standing Bear's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. You offer us rights to land that was already ours. The legal situation has become complicated, Whitmore said smoothly, but with cooperation we can ensure both tribes maintain their current territories without military intervention. It was a threat wrapped in diplomacy. Cooperate or face the army. Several younger warriors muttered angrily, but Standing Bear raised a hand for silence. We will counsel on this. Return at sunset for our answer. Taharos stepped forward. I would speak to the woman. It is my right. Standing Bear looked to Mara. The choice is yours. Will you hear him? Every instinct screamed danger, but Mara nodded. She walked forward, Rook beside her, until she stood facing the man who'd held her captive. Up close, she could see new lines around his eyes, as if grief had aged him weeks in days. You know what they're doing, she said quietly. The papers in your tent. You know Whitmore and his people are using your sister's death. Taharos's jaw clenched. My sister is still dead. Whether whites killed her for hate or profit changes nothing. It changes everything. They want you to attack us, want the conflict. Every death feeds their purpose. And what would you have me do? Embrace her killers. Forget she lived. Remember her by refusing to be their weapon. For a moment, something flickered in Taharos's eyes, doubt perhaps, or recognition. Then Whitmore's hand fell on his shoulder, and the moment passed. "Sunset," Taharos said. "Have an answer by sunset." The Apache delegation rode away, leaving the Lakota camp in turmoil. The council convened immediately, and though women weren't typically included, Standing Bear called for Mara to attend. The tent was thick with pipe smoke and tension. Warriors and elders sat in a careful circle, each voice given equal weight as they debated. Mara understood only fragments, but the tone was clear. Fear, anger, pride, pragmatism, all warring for dominance. Running Elk. The cousin who'd saved them in the storm spoke passionately in Lakota, gesturing toward Rook and Mara. Standing Bear translated for her benefit. "He says the spirits brought you here for a reason, that your presence reveals the true enemy, not Apache, not white settlers, but those who profit from our division." An elder with scars across his chest spoke next, his words sharp and cutting. "And he says Running Elk is young and foolish, that one woman's life isn't worth war with the Apache and the army both." The debate continued as the sun climbed higher. Mara found herself studying the faces around her, these people who were deciding her fate, who held her life in their collective hands. They weren't the savages she'd been taught to fear. They were fathers and sons, leaders trying to navigate impossible choices, men caught between tradition and survival. "I would speak," she said, suddenly surprising herself. The tent fell silent. Standing Bear nodded permission. "I know I'm an outsider here. I know many of you see me as a burden, a danger, maybe even an enemy." She stood though her legs shook. "But I've seen what Whitmore and his kind are planning. The manifest I found is just the beginning. They're supplying weapons to create conflicts, then using those conflicts to justify taking your lands." She pulled out another paper, one she'd hidden even from Rook. "This was in Whitmore's saddlebag when he dismounted. I took it when he was focused on Taharos." Rook read it aloud, translating for those who didn't speak English. It was a letter to the territorial governor outlining plans for a railroad route that would run directly through both Lakota and Apache territories. The Indian conflicts were cited as justification for military intervention to secure the route. The tent erupted in voices. Some called for immediate war, others for negotiation. Standing Bear raised his hand repeatedly for order. "The question remains," he said finally. "Do we surrender the woman for temporary peace, or keep her and face whatever comes?" Rook stood. "I challenge anyone who would surrender her. Single combat here and now." The tent fell silent. Several warriors shifted hands, moving to weapons, but none stood to accept. It wasn't fear, Mara could see that. It was respect for Rook's conviction, even if they disagreed with his choice. Then the tent flap opened, and a young boy rushed in, eyes wide with fear. "Chief, the Apache, they're back, and they brought many more riders, soldiers too." The council scattered warriors rushing for weapons. Outside, the situation had indeed deteriorated. Taharos had returned with 50 warriors and beside them a cavalry unit of at least 30 soldiers, their blue uniforms stark against the prairie grass. Standing Bear emerged from the tent, his face calm despite the odds. "The sun has not yet set, Taharos. You violate your own terms." Whitmore rode forward, no longer bothering with his diplomatic smile. "The situation has changed, Chief. We've received reports of stolen military supplies in this camp. We're here to search for contraband and recover the captive woman." It was a lie, but that didn't matter. The soldiers were already spreading out, rifles ready. The Lakota warriors formed their own line bows and rifles aimed. Children cried from inside tents. Dogs barked. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Mara stepped forward, moving past Rook's attempt to stop her. "I'll come willingly if you call off the search." "No," Rook grabbed her arm. "You don't know what they'll do to you." "I know what they'll do to your people if I don't." Whitmore's laugh was cold. "Touching but unnecessary. We're taking you regardless. The only question is, how many of these savages die in the process? The slur changed everything. Standing Bear straightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of generations. You come to our land, threaten our people, and dare insult us. Leave now or face the consequences. You're outnumbered 2-1, Whitmore pointed out. Numbers mean nothing when defending home. A tense silence stretched between the two forces. Mara could feel the violence building like pressure before a storm. One wrong move, one nervous trigger finger, and the prairie would run red. Then unexpected Taharo spoke. The woman reads Apache sign. She survived our camp with dignity, by our law that makes her Apache. He looked directly at Whitmore. And Apache don't surrender Apache to white soldiers. The statement stunned everyone, including Whitmore, whose face flushed red. What are you talking about? You came here to get her back. I came to reclaim what was stolen, but if she earned her freedom through survival and courage, then she is free. Taharos dismounted, walked to where Mara stood. Tell me truth, white woman. Did you take papers from our camp? Yes. What did they say? Mara met his eyes steadily. They showed that men like Whitmore armed your warriors, encouraged the raid on my family, wanted the violence to escalate so they could justify stealing both our lands. Taharos turned to his warriors, spoke rapidly in Apache, several dismounted rifles swinging toward the soldiers rather than the Lakota. The cavalry captain, a young man who looked increasingly uncomfortable, called out, Mr. Whitmore, sir, what's happening here? Whitmore's composure finally cracked. Captain Morrison, I order you to secure that woman immediately. Morrison hesitated. Sir, you're a civilian advisor. You can't order. I speak with the governor's authority. Then perhaps you should explain why you're trying to start a war between three groups who seem to be finding common ground. The voice came from behind the cavalry line. A man in a marshal's badge rode through, followed by two deputies. He was older, weathered, with eyes that had seen too much and believed too little. Marshal Conway, Whitmore stammered, but what are you doing here? Following up on reports of weapons smuggling in the territory. Imagine my surprise when the trail led to you. Conway, dismounted, walked past the soldiers like they weren't there. Chief Standing Bear Taharos, I'm here to investigate crimes against both your peoples and the United States government. I'd appreciate your cooperation. Standing Bear studied him carefully. You come alone, Marshal. That speaks of either courage or foolishness. Bit of both, probably, but I figured bringing an army would send the wrong message. Conway pulled out a leather portfolio. I've been investigating Whitmore and Gaines for 6 months. Weapons shipments, forged military orders, false reports to incite conflict. I've got enough to arrest him, but I need witnesses willing to testify. Mara stepped forward. I'll testify. I have documents proving their involvement. As will I, Taharos said, surprising everyone again. They dishonored my sister's death, used it for profit. That demands justice. Whitmore backed toward his horse, but Conway's deputies had moved to flank him. This is ridiculous. You can't take the word of savages and a traumatized woman over. His words cut off as Rook's grandmother emerged from her tent, moving with surprising speed for her age. In her hands, she carried a leather satchel that she handed to Conway. 3 seasons ago, men came offering gold for information about troop movements. I took their gold and gave them lies, but I kept their letters. Many letters with many signatures. Conway opened the satchel, his expression darkening as he read, Captain Morrison, I need you to arrest Mr. Whitmore on charges of treason, conspiracy, and inciting violence against federal treaties. You can't do this, Whitmore shouted as soldiers moved to restrain him. I have powerful friends. The governor himself is also under investigation, Conway finished. Your powerful friends are scrambling to distance themselves from you. As they dragged Whitmore away, his composure completely shattered, screaming threats and promises. Taharos approached Mara one final time. You spoke truth about my sister's death being dishonored. For that, I give you this." He pulled a small beaded pouch from his belt. Her name was Morning Star. She made this the day before she died, said it would bring protection to whoever carried it. Perhaps she meant it for you. Mara took the pouch with trembling hands. "I'm sorry for your loss." "As I am for yours." He looked at the assembled groups, Apache Lakota cavalry marshal. Perhaps from loss something new can grow. He mounted his horse, called to his warriors. As the Apache rode away, several raised their hands in farewell, not to the soldiers or even to Standing Bear, but to Mara and Rook. Captain Morrison cleared his throat. "Marshal, what about the woman? Technically, she's listed as a captive, requiring rescue." Conway looked at Mara, then at Rook, then at Standing Bear. "I don't see any captive here. I see a woman who's chosen where she wants to be. The law's got nothing to say about that." As the soldiers prepared to leave with their prisoner, Standing Bear called out, "Marshal Conway, you came alone into hostile territory seeking truth instead of conquest. The Lakota will remember this." Conway touched his hat brim. "Just doing my job, Chief. Though I'd appreciate it if that remembering included not shooting me if we meet again." "That will depend on the circumstances of our meeting." The marshal laughed, a dry sound like wind through autumn leaves. "Fair enough." As the various groups departed, leaving the Lakota camp in relative peace, Mara found herself standing with Rook at the camp's edge, watching dust clouds dissipate in the distance. The crisis had passed, but she could feel the weight of what came next. "They accepted me," she said, wonder in her voice. "No," Rook corrected. "You earned their respect. Acceptance will take time." That evening, as the camp settled into normal rhythms, Morning Dove approached Mara near the cooking fires. The woman who'd confronted her that morning seemed different now, less hostile, more curious. "You risked yourself for us," Morning Dove said. "Why?" Mara considered her answer carefully. "Because dividing people by race, by tribe, by anything except character, it only serves those who profit from our division." Morning Dove studied her for a long moment. "You speak like someone who's lost everything and found something new in the losing." "Maybe I have." "Then perhaps you belong here after all, not as white, not as Lakota, but as yourself." She handed Mara a bowl of stew. "Eat, you're too thin. How can you give Rook strong children with no meat on your bones?" Mara nearly choked on her first bite, her face flushing red. Morning Dove laughed, a rich sound that drew others to join. For the first time since her world had shattered, Mara found herself laughing too. That night the council met again. This time the debate was different. Not whether to keep her, but what her place would be. She couldn't be adopted into the tribe without ceremony and time, but she could be recognized as being under their protection as someone who'd proven herself worthy of sanctuary. Standing Bear himself performed the simple ritual, marking her forehead with red ochre while speaking words in Lakota that Rook translated. "You are recognized. You are seen. You are protected by the circle of our people." But even as the camp celebrated the peaceful resolution, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whitmore had been one man, but the forces behind him, the hunger for land, the willingness to use violence for profit, those remained. Late that night, unable to sleep, she found Rook sitting by a dying fire, studying the papers she'd taken from Whitmore's saddlebag. His expression was grim. "What is it?" He showed her a page she hadn't examined closely before, a list of names, dates, locations. "These aren't just plans for one railroad. This is a systematic campaign. Whitmore was just one agent. There are others targeting different tribes, different conflicts." She sank down beside him, the weight of it overwhelming. "Then stopping him changes nothing. It changes everything. Now we know. Now we can warn others, unite the tribes, expose the truth." He pulled her against his side. "Your capture, your escape, us finding each other, maybe it was meant to happen. Maybe you were meant to be the bridge." "I'm nobody special, Rook. I'm just a woman who survived something terrible." "No." His voice was fierce with conviction. "You're someone who survived and chose to see truth instead of seeking revenge. That makes you extraordinary." They sat together watching embers die to ash. Two people caught between worlds, finding home in each other rather than in any place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The men behind Whitmore wouldn't give up easily. The tensions between tribes and settlers remained. The hunger for land would continue, but tonight she was safe. Tonight she was seen. Tonight she was no longer property or captive or victim. She was Mara Voss, survivor, truth-teller, bridge between worlds, and she was just beginning to understand what that might mean. The spring thaw came early that year, turning the frozen ground to mud and filling the streams with rushing snowmelt. 3 days had passed since Whitmore's arrest, and the camp had settled into an uneasy rhythm that felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. Mara woke before dawn to find Rook's grandmother teaching her to hide the old woman's hands, sure despite her age. "You work it like this," the elder demonstrated, "until it's soft as newborn skin. A woman who can't prepare hide can't truly provide for her family." Mara's hands, still healing from her ordeal, protested the harsh work, but she persisted. Around them, the camp stirred to life. Children ran between the lodges, their laughter a counterpoint to the serious expressions of the adults. Everyone knew the peace was temporary. Running Elk approached as the sun climbed higher, his face troubled. "Rook asks for you. There's been news from the fort." She found Rook with Standing Bear and several warriors studying a letter that had arrived by messenger. Marshal Conway had written in careful script, the words making Rook's expression darken with each line. "Whitmore escaped," Rook told her without preamble. "Killed a deputy, stole horses. Conway thinks he's heading for the territorial capital to reach his allies before they can be arrested." Standing Bear spoke, his voice measured. "This affects more than just Whitmore's crimes. If he reaches the governor, spins the story his way, the army will return in force." "Then we stop him," Mara said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "We." Standing Bear studied her. "You would ride against your own people. They stopped being my people when they burned my family's home and used my suffering for profit. I ride for truth, Chief Standing Bear. Nothing more, nothing less." The chief nodded slowly. "Then we must move quickly, but not with war parties. That would give them excuse to attack. We need proof that cannot be denied, witnesses they cannot dismiss." Mara remembered something, a detail from her captivity that had seemed unimportant then. "In Taharos's camp, I heard Whitmore mention a place, a trading post, called Bethel's Cross, 2 days south. He said that's where they kept the real records, the ones that show everything." Rook's grandmother, who had followed Mara, spoke sharply in Lakota. Standing Bear translated. "She says Bethel's Cross is neutral ground where all tribes trade. If we violate that neutrality—" "We don't violate anything," Rook interjected. "Mara and I go alone. A white woman and her guide, nothing threatening about that." "Except Whitmore knows your faces," Running Elk pointed out. "He'll have men watching for you." Mara stood, an idea forming. "Then we don't go as ourselves." "Rook, your people trade at Bethel's Cross regularly." "Yes. What if we went as traders? You could pass as a breed, mixed blood, and I could be your wife." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Rook's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "It could work," Standing Bear mused, "but you'll need more than disguises. You'll need proof that cannot be questioned, and a way to get it to authorities who aren't bought by Whitmore's people." "I know a journalist," Mara said, suddenly remembering. "Thomas Hartley from the Eastern Tribune. He came through our settlement last year investigating land fraud. He gave my father his card, said to contact him if we ever saw anything suspicious." "Can he be trusted?" Rook asked. "He can be ambitious," Mara admitted, "but that works for us. A story this big would make his career. He won't let it be buried." They spent the day preparing. Mourning Dove helped Mara alter her appearance, braiding her hair in a style common among mixed-blood women, adding touches of beadwork that suggested native heritage without claiming full tribal identity. Rook trimmed his hair shorter, dressed in clothes that mixed white and native styles, the uniform of someone caught between worlds. Rook's grandmother pulled Mara aside as they prepared to leave. "You carry more than just yourself on this journey. You carry the hope of preventing war. Don't let feelings cloud judgment." "What feelings?" Mara asked, though her face flushed. The old woman laughed. "Child, the whole camp can see how you and my grandson look at each other. It's not wrong, but it can be dangerous. Love makes people do foolish things." "I barely know him." "You know enough. You've seen him at his best and worst. He's seen you survive what would break most people. That's more truth than most couples get in a lifetime." She pressed a small bundle into Mara's hands. "Herbs for healing, poisons for enemies. Know the difference." They left at dusk, leading pack horses loaded with furs to complete their disguise as traders. The moon was new, leaving them to navigate by starlight and instinct. They rode in comfortable silence, each lost in thought about what lay ahead. Near midnight, Rook suddenly pulled up short, holding his hand for silence. Voices carried on the wind, not speaking any tribal language, but the rough English of frontier men. They dismounted, creeping forward until they could see a campfire below. 4 men sat around it, passing a bottle between them. "Boss says they might come this way," one was saying. $50 gold to whoever spots them first." "Why's Whitmore so worried about one squaw and a breed?" another asked. "Because they got papers, documents that could hang half the territorial government. Boss wants them dead before they can talk." Mara and Rook exchanged glances. They'd have to find another route, adding hours to their journey. As they crept back to their horses, Mara's foot found a loose stone. It clattered down the slope, the sound enormous in the quiet night. "What was that?" One of the men stood reaching for his rifle. "Probably a deer," another said. But they were all standing now, weapons ready. Rook acted without hesitation. He let out a perfect mountain lion's scream, the sound raising every hair on Mara's neck. The men below cursed, firing wild shots into the darkness. "Cougar, it's hunting us." They scattered, abandoning their camp in panic. Rook grabbed Mara's hand, and they ran for their horses, mounting and riding hard as shouts echoed behind them. They didn't slow until dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold. "Mountain lion," Mara gasped, catching her breath. "My grandfather taught me, said sometimes the best weapon is fear itself." They reached Bethel's Cross as the sun climbed toward noon. The trading post sat at a crossroads, a cluster of buildings that had grown organically over years. Mara could see representatives from multiple tribes, Apache, Lakota, Cheyenne, even some Crow, all maintaining careful neutrality in this space, dedicated to commerce rather than conflict. The main building was a 2-story structure of logs and dried mud, with a wide porch where traders displayed their wares. Rook guided them to the stable, playing his role perfectly subservient enough to see mixed blood proud enough to demand respect. Inside the trading post was thick with smoke and conversation in a dozen languages. Behind the main counter stood Josiah Bethel himself, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and eyes that missed nothing. He recognized Rook despite the disguise, Mara could tell, but his expression didn't change. "What brings you to my establishment?" Bethel asked in a neutral tone. "Trade," Rook replied simply, setting their fur bundles on the counter. "And information if the price is right." Bethel's eyes flicked to Mara, took in her altered appearance, the way she stood slightly behind Rook as a proper mixed-blood wife would. "Information's expensive these days. Lots of people asking questions." "Then perhaps we're selling rather than buying," Mara said softly, breaking character just enough to catch Bethel's attention. He studied them both more carefully. "Step into my office. We can discuss terms privately." The office was a cramped room behind the main store filled with ledgers and strongboxes. Bethel closed the door, then surprised them both by saying, "Marshal Conway sent word you might come." Conway. Rook tensed hand, moving to his knife. "Relax, son. The Marshal and I have an understanding. I keep the peace here. He doesn't ask too many questions about my inventory." Bethel moved to a painting on the wall, swung it aside to reveal a safe. "Whitmore was here yesterday, drunk, angry, talking too much. Left these behind." He pulled out a leather portfolio thick with documents. Mara opened it, her eyes widening as she read. "These are contracts. Between the trading company and military suppliers, they've been selling the same weapons to both the army and the tribes, driving up prices on both sides." "There's more," Bethel said. "Whitmore mentioned a meeting tonight. All the major players planning their next move. They're scared making mistakes." "Where?" Rook asked. "The old mission 5 miles north. Abandoned for years, perfect for secrets." Bethel pulled out another paper. "Map to get there, but be careful. They'll have guards." As they prepared to leave, Bethel caught Rook's arm. "Your father traded here before the wars. Good man, honest. He'd be proud of what you're doing. You knew my father. Knew him well enough to know you have his courage and your mother's wisdom. Use both tonight." They left the trading post separately, Mara first, with the pack horses, Rook following 10 minutes later. They met at a grove of cottonwoods a mile distant where they could watch the road without being seen. "We need to get word to Conway," Mara said, but Rook shook his head. "No time. If this meeting happens tonight, we need to be there. This might be our only chance to identify all the conspirators." As darkness fell, they approached the old mission carefully. It sat on a rise, its bell tower collapsed walls crumbling but still standing. Lights flickered in the windows, lanterns, many of them. Horses were tethered outside, expensive ones with silver-studded saddles. They counted 6 guards positioned to watch all approaches. But Rook knew something they didn't. Missions always had root cellars, and root cellars often had external entrances for loading supplies. They found it beneath a tangle of old vines, the wooden door rotted but passable. The cellar was dark, musty, filled with debris from years of abandonment, but they could hear voices above, muffled but distinct. Moving carefully through the darkness, they found the stairs leading up. The door at the top was cracked open, offering a view of the main room. What they saw made Mara's blood run cold. Whitmore was there as expected, but so were others, the territorial governor himself, several military officers in uniform, even a federal judge she recognized from newspaper sketches, at least 20 men all complicit in the conspiracy. "The situation is salvageable," the governor was saying. "Whitmore's arrest is a setback, nothing more. We blame everything on him, say he acted alone." "That won't work," Whitmore snarled. "That woman has documents. The breed she's with knows too much. They have to die." "Killing them makes martyrs," the judge argued. "Better to discredit them, say she's hysterical from her ordeal, that the Indian influenced her mind." A military officer stood his medals, catching the lantern light. "Gentlemen, you're overcomplicating this. We stick to the plan, escalate conflicts between tribes, justify military intervention, clear the land for development. The Railroad Consortium has already paid us handsomely for future considerations." Mara felt Rook tense beside her. They were hearing it all, the full conspiracy laid bare. But without witnesses, it was their word against powerful men. She pulled out the small journal she always carried, began writing quickly, in the dim light, recording every name, every admission. Then disaster struck. The rotted step they were standing on cracked under their combined weight. The sound was slight, but in the moment of silence that followed it might as well have been thunder. "What was that?" someone asked. "Check the cellar," Whitmore ordered. Todd. Footsteps approached the door. Rook pushed Mara back, drawing his knife. But before violence could erupt, another voice called out, "Fire, fire, in the stable." The room above erupted in chaos. Men ran for the door, shouting orders. In the confusion, Rook and Mara slipped out through the cellar entrance. They could see the stable ablaze, horses screaming, men struggling to save their valuable mounts. "We need to go," Rook said, but Mara pulled him toward the mission. The documents, they might have more inside. They ran through the now empty building, finding the room where the conspirators had met. On the table lay maps, contracts, correspondence, a treasure trove of evidence. Mara grabbed everything she could carry, stuffing papers into her dress, her pockets, anywhere they would fit. "Someone's coming," Rook warned. They ran for the window, but Whitmore appeared in the doorway, pistol raised. "I knew it was you, could smell the sanctimony from the cellar." He fired. Rook shoved Mara aside, the bullet grazing his shoulder instead of finding her heart. They crashed through the window in a shower of glass, hit the ground rolling. More shots followed, but they were already running, using the smoke from the burning stable as cover. Their horses were where they'd left them, and they rode hard into the night. Behind them they could hear pursuit organizing, but they had a head start, and Rook knew the terrain. They rode until dawn, switching directions multiple times, using every trick Rook knew to break their trail. Finally exhausted, they stopped at a box canyon Rook remembered from hunting trips. "Let me see your shoulder," Mara insisted. The wound was shallow but bloody. As she cleaned it using the herbs Rook's grandmother had given her, she said, "We have everything we need to expose them, but how do we get it to someone who can act on it?" "There's a telegraph station at Fort Laramie," Rook said. "If we can get there, wire your journalist friend." That's 3 days' ride through hostile territory. Whitmore's men will be watching every trail. Then we don't take trails. They spent the day resting, planning, tending wounds, both physical and emotional. As night fell, Mara found herself sitting close to Rook, their shoulders touching. "When this is over," she said quietly, "what happens to us? What do you want to happen?" She turned to face him fully. "I want to stop pretending we're playing roles. In the trading post, when I acted as your wife, it didn't feel like acting." He cupped her face with his good hand. "Mara Voss, you've turned my world inside out. I was content in my exile, my solitude. Then you came along and made me want things I'd given up on." "What things?" "A future, a family, a reason to fight for more than just survival." Their lips met soft at first, then with growing passion. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I love you," she said simply. "I don't know when it happened, somewhere between you saving me and me saving you. But I do. And I love you. Have since you stood up to Taharos and said you weren't nothing. You were magnificent." They held each other through the night, drawing strength from their connection. In the morning they would ride toward Fort Laramie and an uncertain future. But tonight they had each other, and that was enough. The next day brought new challenges. A dust storm rose from the south, cutting visibility to mere feet. They pushed through it, Rook navigating by instinct and memory. When it cleared, they found themselves nearly surrounded by a hunting party, not Whitmore's men, but Crow warriors, traditional enemies of the Lakota. The lead warrior recognized Rook spoke in accented English. "Lakota dog, you're far from your territory." "I claim passage rights," Rook replied calmly. "I'm escorting this woman to Fort Laramie on urgent business." The Crow laughed. "Passage rights for an exile and a white woman? I think not." Mara stepped forward, pulling out one of the documents she'd saved. "This concerns all tribes. The men who would steal Lakota land would steal yours too." She showed them the maps, pointed out the planned railroad routes that cut through Crow territory as well. The warriors gathered, muttering among themselves. Finally their leader spoke. "We will not hinder you, but neither will we help. The problems of Lakota and whites are not our concern." "They will be," Mara said firmly. "When the railroad comes, when settlers flood in, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember you had a chance to stand against it and chose indifference." The warrior's face hardened, but he gestured for his men to lower their weapons. "Go then, but know that Crow eyes watch these lands. Your enemies are not our enemies, but neither are you our friends. They rode on the weight of observation heavy on their backs. That night, camped in a grove of aspens, they heard riders approaching. Not one or two, but many. They prepared for battle, but the riders carried torches announcing their presence. It was Standing Bear himself, leading 30 Lakota warriors. With him rode Marshal Conway and, surprisingly, Thomas Hartley, the journalist Mara had mentioned. "How?" Mara gasped. "Bethel sent word," Conway explained. "Said you'd found something big. I contacted Hartley, convinced Standing Bear that tribal interests aligned with exposing this conspiracy." Hartley, a thin man with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers, was already examining the documents Mara had gathered. "This is incredible. This proves systematic corruption at the highest levels. With this, we can bring down the entire conspiracy." "If we can get it published before they silence us," Conway added grimly. "Whitmore has powerful friends." "Then we make it impossible to silence," Standing Bear said. "Tomorrow we ride to Fort Laramie, not as war party, but as delegation. Lakota Apache if Taharos will come, Cheyenne, any who will stand with us. We present these documents publicly with many witnesses." "That could work," Conway mused. "A public revelation too big to cover up." They spent the night planning, and by morning runners had gone to various tribes. The response was swift. Taharos himself arrived with 20 Apache warriors, having heard of the conspiracy that had used his sister's death for profit. A Cheyenne chief brought 10 braves. Even the Crow, shamed perhaps by Mara's words, sent observers. The procession that approached Fort Laramie was unlike anything the fort had seen. Over 100 Native Americans from multiple tribes, a federal marshal, a journalist, and at the center, a white woman and a Lakota warrior whose love had somehow become the catalyst for revelation. The fort's commander, Colonel Harrison, met them at the gates, nervous but maintaining military bearing. "Marshal Conway, what is the meaning of this gathering?" "Justice, Colonel. We're here to present evidence of a conspiracy that threatens the peace of the entire territory." They convened in the fort's main courtyard, soldiers and civilians, gathering to witness the unprecedented event. Hartley had set up his camera, documenting everything. Mara stood before them all, her voice clear and strong, as she told her story, the raid, her captivity, the discovery of the conspiracy. Then she presented the documents one by one, each more damning than the last. The crowd grew silent as the scope of the corruption became clear. Officers looked uncomfortable as their superiors were implicated. Civilians muttered angrily about being deceived. Whitmore tried one last gambit. He'd been hiding in the crowd, but now pushed forward. "This is all lies. This woman is deranged, influenced by her savage captors." Before anyone could respond, Taharos stepped forward. "This woman showed more honor in captivity than you have shown in freedom. She speaks truth." "As do I," Standing Bear added. "The Lakota confirm her testimony." One by one, other chiefs stood, adding their voices. The weight of their combined witness was overwhelming. Colonel Harrison, who Mara suspected had been wavering on the edge of the conspiracy himself, made a decision. "Mr. Whitmore, you're under military arrest pending a full investigation. All personnel named in these documents are relieved of duty immediately." The crowd erupted cheers from some, angry protests from others. In the chaos, Whitmore pulled a hidden derringer aimed at Mara. Time seemed to slow. Rook moved, but he was too far away. The shot rang out, but Whitmore fell, not Mara. Standing behind him, smoking pistol in hand, stood Mourning Dove. She'd followed the delegation, suspicious and protective in equal measure. "No one else dies for their greed," she said simply. Whitmore survived barely to face trial. The conspiracy unraveled over the following weeks, as Hartley's articles spread across the nation, sparking outrage and reform. The governor resigned in disgrace. The judge was impeached. The railroad plans were suspended, pending new negotiations that included tribal input. But for Mara and Rook, The public vindication was less important than the private moment that came after. As the crowd dispersed and the dust settled, they stood together in the fort's courtyard, finally free of the shadows that had pursued them. "What now?" Rook asked. Mara pulled out one last document, one she hadn't shown anyone else. "Before he died, my father filed a homestead claim on land near the Lakota territory border. It's mine now. I thought maybe we could build something there, something new. A home between worlds, a home for people like us who don't fit in just one place." She took his hand. "Will you help me build it?" Instead of answering with words, he kissed her there in front of everyone, Lakota and Apache soldiers and civilians. It was a declaration as powerful as any document, a claiming as profound as any ceremony. "I take that as a yes," she said, when they parted, both laughing. Standing Bear approached his expression formal. "Rook Greyhawk, the council has voted. Your exile is lifted. You may return to your people if you choose." Rook looked at Mara, then back at his chief. "My people are wherever she is, but we'll visit often if we're welcome." "You're both welcome. You've shown that bridges between peoples are possible." He pulled out a ceremonial blanket, wrapped it around both their shoulders. "The Lakota recognize this union. May it bring healing to all it touches." As the sun set over Fort Laramie, painting the sky in shades of hope, Mara stood with Rook, surrounded by an unlikely alliance of former enemies. The conspiracy was broken, but more importantly, something new had been born, a recognition that division served only those who profited from conflict. She thought of her family gone, but not forgotten. She touched the pouch Taharos had given her, carrying his sister's protection. She felt the weight of Rook's grandmother's herbs in her pocket, knowledge passed between generations. She was no longer just Mara Voss, settler's daughter. She was something new, something necessary. "Ready to go home?" Rook asked. "We don't have a home yet," she pointed out. "Then ready to go build one." She squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own, now evidence of survival and determination. "I've been ready since the moment you said, 'Don't scream,' in the darkness." They mounted their horses, but before they could ride out, Hartley called after them. "Miss Voss, Mr. Greyhawk, one question for my readers after everything you've been through. What would you say to those who believe the races should remain separate?" Mara looked at Rook, saw her own answer reflected in his eyes. "I'd say that separation is just another kind of chain. We're all human. We all bleed red. We all want safety for our children and hope for tomorrow. The only real enemy is those who profit from making us forget that." As they rode toward their uncertain but chosen future behind them, the fort buzzed with change. Messages flew across telegraph wires, carrying truth to distant cities. The powerful scrambled to distance themselves from scandal. And in the camps of various tribes, elders discussed this new possibility that perhaps sometimes unity could be stronger than division. But Mara and Rook rode away from all that toward a piece of land that would become their own, where they would build not just a home but a symbol, where former enemies could meet in peace, where mixed-blood children could grow up belonging fully to themselves, where love could heal what hatred had torn apart. The road would be hard. There would be those on both sides who called them traitors, who saw their union as betrayal rather than bridge. But they had each other, and they had learned that sometimes that was enough to change the world. The land stretched before them in the early spring morning, 40 acres of prairie grass, and possibility where the territories met legally theirs, but spiritually belonging to something larger. Mara stood beside the wagon, loaded with lumber and supplies, her hand shading her eyes as she surveyed what would become their home. 6 weeks had passed since Fort Laramie, 6 weeks of preparation and planning while the world shifted around them. "The well should go here," Rook said, testing the ground with his boot. "Water runs close beneath this spot. My grandfather taught me to feel for it." They'd been working since dawn, marking boundaries, planning where each structure would stand. The main house first, then a barn, eventually a trading post that would serve all peoples equally. But as Mara drove the first stake into the ground, she heard horses approaching from the east. Marshal Conway appeared over the rise, but his expression carried no warmth. Behind him rode two federal agents in black suits, their faces carved from stone. "Ms. Voss, Mr. Greyhawk, I'm afraid there's been a development." The lead agent dismounted, pulled out an official document. "This homestead claim is being challenged. The Whitmore and Gaines Trading Company filed papers stating the land was promised to them in a prior agreement with the territorial government." "That's impossible," Mara protested. "My father filed his claim 2 years ago, long before any of this started. Nevertheless, you'll need to defend your claim in court. The hearing is set for next week in the territorial capital." The agent's smile held no warmth. "Of course, if you fail to appear, the land defaults to the challenger." After they left, Rook's hands clenched into fists. "It's starting again. Whitmore's in prison, but his partners are still fighting." "Then we fight back," Mara said, though her heart sank at the thought of more conflict. "We've come too far to give up now." That evening, unexpected help arrived. A small convoy of wagons approached from the west, Standing Bear, leading Lakota workers to Taharos, with Apache craftsmen, even a group of Cheyenne, all coming to help raise their house before the court hearing. "You stood for us," Standing Bear explained simply. "Now we stand for you." The next 3 days became a miracle of cooperation. Warriors who'd been enemies worked side by side, raising walls, setting beams. Morning Dove organized the women in preparing meals that fed everyone, mixing traditions into something new. Mara found herself working alongside Apache women who taught her their techniques for waterproofing, while Lakota men showed Rook their methods for building against prairie winds. On the second night, as they sat around a massive communal fire, an old Cheyenne storyteller spoke. His words, translated by several voices, wove a tale of a time before divisions, when all peoples moved freely across the land. "Perhaps," he said, looking directly at Mara and Rook, "that time comes again in new form." The house rose faster than seemed possible, as if the land itself wanted them to succeed. By the third day, they had walls, a roof, and the beginning of what would become legend, the first truly integrated homestead in the territories. But triumph was short-lived. That night, riders approached under cover of darkness. Not government men this time, but hired guns, their intent clear in the torches they carried. "Burn it down," their leader shouted. "Leave nothing standing." The attack came from 3 sides, but they'd underestimated their opposition. Warriors from 3 tribes formed a defensive line, while Mara and Rook took positions at the windows with rifles. The battle was brief but fierce, ending when Taharos personally dragged the gang's leader from his horse. "You attack those under Apache protection," he said coldly. "That makes you our enemy." The surviving attackers fled, but everyone knew they'd return with more men better armed. The court hearing was still 4 days away, and their enemies wouldn't wait for legal proceedings. "We need those documents," Hartley said. He'd arrived that morning to cover the story, his presence a shield against official violence, but useless against hired killers. The ones that proved the prior claim was forged. "They're in a safety deposit box in Denver," Mara said. 2 days' ride each way." "I'll go," Rook volunteered, but she shook her head. "We go together or not at all. I won't lose you now." They left before dawn, taking spare horses to switch between riding hard across country that grew more hostile with each mile. At a river crossing, they found the ferry destroyed, forcing them to swim their horses across water still cold with mountain snowmelt. Mara's lips were blue by the time they reached the far shore, but she refused to stop to warm up. In Denver, they found the bank surrounded by men in familiar black suits. Federal agents, but whose side were they on? Rook guided them to the back entrance, where a young clerk Mara recognized from her father's business dealings let them in. "Miss Voss, we heard you were dead." "Not yet, Timothy. I need access to my father's safety deposit box." The documents were there along with something unexpected, A letter from her father written days before his death. "My dearest Mara," she read aloud, her voice breaking, "if you're reading this, something has happened to me. Know that I've suspected the trading company's schemes for months. The evidence in this box should protect our claim, but more importantly, it proves a pattern of theft going back years. Use it wisely. Use it to build the future we dreamed of, where all people could live in peace. Your loving father." She wiped away tears, carefully folding the letter. He knew they might come for him. "He prepared for it," Rook said gently. "He protected you, even in death." They gathered everything, but as they prepared to leave, Timothy grabbed Rook's arm. "There's something else. Men came yesterday asking about you. They had a warrant for your arrest, Mr. Greyhawk. Murder of a federal officer, they said." "That's a lie," Mara protested. "I know," Timothy Sambiba said. "The officer they claim you killed was seen alive this morning. It's a trap. They're going to arrest you the moment you appear in court." They left Denver by a different route, but their enemies had anticipated this. At Beaver Creek, 20 miles from home, they rode into an ambush. Gunfire erupted from the rocks above, forcing them to shelter behind a fallen tree. "Give up the documents and you can go free," someone shouted. Rook laughed bitterly. "They really think we're that naive." The firefight lasted an hour, ammunition running low on both sides. Then, just as their situation grew desperate, war cries filled the air. Running Elk led 30 warriors down from the ridge, having tracked them from the homestead. The ambushers caught between two forces scattered like leaves before wind. "Getting to be a habit, cousin," Running Elk said with a grin. "Saving you from white men's bullets." They reached the homestead to find it transformed. A wooden fence now surrounded the property, and armed warriors from multiple tribes patrolled the perimeter. The house stood complete, smoke rising from its chimney like a promise of permanence. That night, as they prepared for the court hearing, Conway arrived with disturbing news. "The judge assigned to your case is Jerome Blackwood. He's deep in the trading company's pocket." "Then we're finished before we start," Rook said. "Maybe not," Hartley interjected. "I've been investigating Blackwood. He takes bribes, yes, but he's also a coward. If we make the hearing public enough, bring enough pressure, he might fold." "How public?" Mara asked. "I've invited every newspaper in 3 territories. The governor's opponents are sending observers. Even the federal court in Washington has expressed interest." Hartley smiled. "Sometimes the best weapon against corruption is sunlight." The morning of the hearing, they traveled to the territorial capital in a procession that defied all convention. Lakota, Apache, Cheyenne, and Crow warriors rode alongside settlers who'd come to support Mara's claim. The courthouse steps were packed with observers, journalists, and curious citizens. Inside, Judge Blackwood looked like he'd swallowed something sour. The trading company's lawyers, 3 men in expensive suits, seemed equally uncomfortable with the attention. "This is a simple matter of competing claims," the lead lawyer began. "The Whitmore and Gaines Trading Company has prior documentation, forged documentation." Mara interrupted, standing. "Your Honor, I have proof that the trading company has been falsifying claims for years, stealing land from both settlers and tribes." "The defendant will remain silent until called," Blackwood said, but his voice lacked conviction. The trading company presented their case first, full of legal terminology and confident assertions. But when Mara's turn came, she didn't just present documents. She told the story, all of it. Her family's murder, her captivity, the conspiracy she'd uncovered. The courtroom sat transfixed as she laid out the full scope of the trading company's crimes. "Objection," the trading company's lawyer shouted. "This is irrelevant to the land claim." "On the contrary," a new voice said from the back of the room. A distinguished man in federal judicial robes entered. "I'm Circuit Judge Harrison from the federal court. Given the interstate nature of these alleged crimes, I'm assuming jurisdiction." Blackwood practically wilted with relief, quickly yielding his bench. Judge Harrison took his place, his expression stern but fair. "Continue, Miss Voss." She presented everything: the forged documents, the weapons sales, the conspiracy to incite tribal wars. But the trading company's lawyers had one more card to play. Even if these allegations are true, they argued, Rook Greyhawk cannot legally own land. He's an Indian. The law is clear. "Actually," Mara said, pulling out one last document, "Rook and I were married 3 days ago in a ceremony recognized by both tribal law and, thanks to Marshal Conway's witness, territorial law. The land is in my name, but we own it together." The courtroom erupted. The trading company's lawyers protested, but Judge Harrison raised his hand for silence. "I've heard enough. The evidence clearly shows a pattern of fraud by the trading company. Not only is Miss Voss's claim upheld, but I'm ordering a full federal investigation into the company's practices." As they left the courthouse surrounded by celebrating supporters, Whitmore appeared on the steps. He'd been brought from prison to testify, but never called. His expensive clothes were replaced by prison gray, his arrogance replaced by something else. Fear, maybe, or recognition of defeat. "You think you've won," he called to Mara. "You've only delayed the inevitable. Progress will sweep all this away, your little integrated paradise, these tribal lands, all of it." Mara climbed the steps until she stood face to face with him. "You're right. Change is coming. But it won't be your kind of progress built on lies and blood. It'll be our kind, built on truth and cooperation." "Pretty words," Whitmore sneered. "Let's see how long they last when the railroad comes anyway." "The railroad's coming," Taharo said, stepping forward. "But now we have a say in where it goes. The tribes have formed a coalition with your documents as evidence. We're negotiating directly with Washington." Whitmore's face went white. His empire hadn't just failed, it had created the very unity he'd tried to prevent. Spring turned to summer on the homestead, and with it came growth beyond anything Mara had imagined. Their trading post opened, serving all peoples equally. Their home became a meeting place where former enemies shared meals and stories. The garden she planted with seeds from Rook's grandmother mixed corn beans and squash with vegetables from her mother's carefully preserved collection. On a particularly hot afternoon, as Mara worked in the garden, she felt a flutter in her belly. She placed her hand there, wonder spreading across her face. Rook noticed immediately. "What is it?" "Life," she said simply. "New life." He crossed to her in 3 strides, lifting her and spinning her around. "A child, our child. The first of many, I hope. Children who'll belong everywhere because they come from everywhere." That evening, as news spread through the scattered camps and settlements, gifts began arriving. Lakota cradle boards, Apache blessing beads, Cheyenne blankets, even items from white settlers who'd come to respect what Mara and Rook represented. Their child would be born into a community that transcended old divisions, but challenges remained. Letters arrived weekly with threats, offers to buy them out, warnings of violence. The trading company, though wounded, wasn't dead. Its supporters in government still maneuvered for advantage. The crisis came in late summer. Mara woke to find their water supply contaminated, their cattle sick. Rook tracked the source. Men had poisoned the stream upstream on government land where tribal law couldn't reach. "They're trying to force us out," he said grimly. "Then we fight back with their own weapons," Mara replied. She wrote to Hartley, who published an expose that reached newspapers across the nation. The public outcry was immediate. How dare anyone poison water that flowed to pregnant women and children? The government was forced to act. The poisoners were arrested, the stream cleaned. But more importantly, new legislation was proposed, the Voss Greyhawk Act, protecting integrated settlements and mixed families from discrimination. As autumn arrived, painting the prairie in gold and amber, a messenger brought unexpected news. The president himself would visit the territory, wanting to see this experiment in integration that had captured the nation's attention. The presidential visit turned the homestead into a carnival. Reporters, dignitaries, and curious citizens flooded the area. But the president, a pragmatist who'd risen above party politics, seemed genuinely interested in their story. "Show me," he said simply. "Show me how this works." They showed him the trading post where Apache, Lakota, and white traders negotiated in 3 languages. The school Morning Dove had started, where children of all backgrounds learned together. The fields where different agricultural traditions merged into something more productive than any single approach. "Critics say this can't last," the president observed, "that human nature will reassert itself, divisions will return." "Maybe," Mara admitted, "but maybe not. We're not trying to erase differences, Mr. President. We're celebrating them while finding common ground." The president turned to Rook. "And you, a Lakota warrior turned homesteader, what do your people think?" "I am my people," Rook replied, "just as Mara is hers. We're not abandoning our heritages, we're proving they can coexist." Before leaving, the president made an announcement that stunned everyone. The government would designate their area as a special territory, the integration zone where different laws would apply, allowing for true cooperation between tribes and settlers. That night, as celebration continued around them, Mara and Rook walked to the hill overlooking their land. The moon was full, casting silver light across the prairie. Below, fires burned where different groups camped their voices, mixing in songs both ancient and new. "My father would have loved this," Mara said softly. "He knows," Rook replied. "The spirits of our ancestors watch and approve." A pain shot through Mara's belly, making her gasp. "The baby, I think it's time." The birth was difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Rook's grandmother attended along with a white midwife from town and an Apache medicine woman, 3 traditions working together to bring new life into the world. When their son finally arrived, his cry strong and clear, the waiting crowd erupted in celebration. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's strong features, a perfect blend of 2 worlds. "What will you name him?" Standing Bear asked, having waited through the night. Mara and Rook exchanged glances. They'd discussed this extensively. "Samuel Dakota Greyhawk," Mara said. "Samuel for my father Dakota, meaning friend to everyone in Lakota." The baby was passed from hand to hand, blessed by elders from multiple tribes, welcomed by settlers who'd overcome their prejudices. In that moment, he belonged to everyone, and no one free to choose his own path when the time came. Seasons passed. The homestead grew into a small town, integration they called it. The trading company finally collapsed when its leaders were convicted of fraud and conspiracy. Whitmore died in prison, unrepentant to the end. But his death marked the end of an era, not a victory for any side. Samuel grew strong, speaking 3 languages by age 4, comfortable in buckskin or cotton, equally at home in a lodge or a cabin. He was joined by siblings, a daughter named Sarah, Morning Star twins, called Joseph and Julia. Each child was a bridge, proving daily that division was a choice, not destiny. On their 5th anniversary, Mara and Rook stood again on the hill overlooking their land. The town spread below them now, a school, a clinic, businesses run by people of all backgrounds. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still those who resented change, but it was real and it was growing. "Do you ever regret it?" Rook asked. "The life you might have had if none of this had happened?" Mara considered the question. In another life, she'd have married a local farmer, raised children who never questioned the way things were lived, and died within 10 miles of where she was born. "I regret the pain," she said finally. "The deaths, the suffering, but not the journey, not where it led us." A rider approached a young man, half Cheyenne, half Irish, wearing a badge. "Mr. and Mrs. Greyhawk, there's a delegation from Washington. They want to discuss expanding the integration zone, making it a model for other territories." Mara and Rook exchanged glances. seeing the same mixture of exhaustion and determination in each other's eyes. The work never ended. Each victory brought new challenges, but that was the price of building something new. "Tell them we'll meet them at the trading post," Mara said, "and tell them to bring their best arguments. We don't accept anything less than full equality for all residents." As the messenger rode away, Rook pulled Mara close. "Remember when you were nothing but a captive, and I was nothing but an exile." "We were never nothing," she corrected. "We just hadn't found our something yet." Their children ran up the hill, Samuel leading, the others following. They crashed into their parents' legs, full of stories about their day, their voices a mixture of languages and laughter. "Papa running elk says he'll teach me to track tomorrow. Mama, the teacher says I write the best letters in class. I caught a frog, it was huge." Mara and Rook listened, laughed, loved. This was their victory, not the land, not the legal battles, not even the town they'd built. It was this children who would never know a world where their existence was impossible, who would grow up believing that bridges between peoples were normal, natural, necessary. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of hope and promise, the Greyhawk family walked down the hill toward their home. Behind them, their shadows stretched long across the land, not the shadows of a white woman and a Lakota warrior, but of a family that had redefined what family could mean. In the trading post, delegates waited with papers and plans. In the camps, elders prepared for council. In the town, people of all backgrounds prepared for another day of building something unprecedented. But for this moment, Mara and Rook were simply parents, walking home with their children, living proof that love could conquer division, that courage could overcome prejudice, and that sometimes being enslaved and then saved could lead not to ending, but to beginning. The story of the Apache captive and the Lakota warrior who saved her had become legend told around fires and in schoolrooms, embellished with each telling. But the truth was simpler and more powerful. Two people chose each other over everything they'd been taught, and in doing so changed a small piece of the world. As night fell over, integration stars appeared one by one, each a point of light in the darkness, each alone but part of a greater constellation. Like the people below, different but connected, separate but whole, proof that the universe itself was built on the principle of unity in diversity. The end was really just another beginning, and Mara Voss, Greyhawk, once captive, now free, once nothing, now everything, closed the door of her home and prepared for whatever tomorrow would bring, knowing that whatever it was, she would face it with the man who'd saved her body and the love that had saved them both.